Our next speaker is Donovan Campbell. For those of you who don't know Donovan, he has a book called Joker One, a Marine platoon story of courage, leadership, and brotherhood. Okay? And just to let you know, if you're thinking about getting this book and reading it, this is a real look right into the life of what our Marines do, and it is not easy. Right? It is not an easy read. It is not a comfortable read. It is a very difficult read. It makes you appreciate our military and their service for us on what they put on the line every day. But Donovan got to lead a great group of men over there, and some of the lessons that he's learned, not only from his family, but from his service for our country, he's going to share it with you today. So please welcome Donovan Campbell.
All right, so I'm been made fully aware of the fact that I'm the one thing standing between you and Thanksgiving break. So I will do my best to stay engaged and engaging. But guys, I was so excited to come talk today because you don't often get to talk to Christians about worldview and about how they view the world. And the thing that has made me just so happy to see and to learn over the course of the years, because I'm not that much older than you, is that the Christian worldview is true. It's not something that is from a book that was written several thousand years ago. It is not something that was relevant then and is irrelevant now. It is a worldview that explains how the world works better than anything else out there, and it's relevant to our lives. And so what I want to share with you today are some of the lessons in leadership and in life that I took out of combat and I took out of the Marines. And the really cool thing is the Marine Corps, which is not a Christian institution, has instituted Christian values, not because it's pursued Christian values, but because the Marine Corps is concerned with what works. And it's concerned with what works when lives are on the line. And you have got to make life and death decisions, and you've got to make them well, and you've got to make them in the middle of combat, and you got 5 seconds or less to make them. So they have no time to deal with things that don't work. And they have iterated towards Christian leadership and character principles, not because they're Christians, but because they're the only principles that work. And so that's really what I want to share with you guys today. And what I want to do is start by telling you a little bit about how I came to write a book, and then I want to tell you a little bit about what happened overseas so you guys can understand the context from which these leadership lessons came, and then just share with you what the lessons are. So guys, I didn't mean to write a book. I'm a totally accidental author, and the reason I say that is this: when I was overseas, and when I came back, I realized that as an officer, as a leader of my men, I had completely and totally failed them because I did not write them up for enough awards. The average age of the person in the infantry overseas is 20 and a half years old. Most of my guys were between 17 and 21. So when a 19-year-old runs into fire and he's waving his arms and he's screaming, "Shoot at me," so that his wounded friend, the fire will go from his wounded friend who's laying there, and the fire will instead go towards him who's waving his arms. When he does something like that, or he runs out and he grabs a wounded Iraqi child in the middle of a fierce firefight, and he brings him back to safety, and maybe he gets wounded doing so, the only thing that you as a leader can do for this 19-year-old is take a little bit of ribbon and you wrap it around a little bit of metal and you pin it to his chest and you say, "Well done, Marine. I am so proud of you. I am so proud of your heroism. Here is the award that you have earned." I didn't do enough of that. I didn't realize that that's the only thing you can do. You can't give them a bonus. You can't give them a vacation. You can't give them a promotion. You can't give them a day off. The only thing you can do to say thank you for your heroism is write them up for an award, and I failed. And so when I came back to the States, I actually came back to business school. I was in business school about 7 months after fierce urban combat in Ramadi. And so it was a weird transition, and it took me about a year to process, and then it took me about a year to realize that what my men had done was incredible, and I had failed to reward them for it. And so I thought, the only way I can make up for this is to write down their story for them, because they were all telling me the same thing, and that was this: hey, sir, our moms and our dads and our wives and our fiancés and brothers and sisters, they don't know what we've done, because there's nothing like what we did overseas in America, what we did in Iraq, that's anything comparable to America. I can't point to this or that and say this is what war is like. It's so hard to explain. It's like trying to explain red to someone who's colorblind. You can't do it, and eventually they just don't. You just give up. And so I thought, that's a shame. Your dads and your moms should know what you've done. So I thought, I failed you. I'm going to write down your story, and I'm just going to email it to you in Microsoft Word, and you can give it to your mom or your dad or your wife or your fiance, and you can say, look, I don't talk about this, but my lieutenant wrote it down for me. Here's what I did, and now you can know what I did. And one thing led to the other. Next thing you knew, the story was out there. So just briefly, the story that I wrote is a story of my Marines. It'd be great if we could get the first slide up. And in the fall of 2003, I was given command, and you see them here, of a Marine Corps infantry platoon whose radio call sign was Joker 1. And these are them. You see how young they are. With 4 exceptions, everyone I had was between the age of 18 and 21. And they had really diverse backgrounds. I had one guy, his name was Joe Mahardy. He was the oldest of 4 from an Irish Catholic family in New York. He was on the dean's list at Syracuse University as a freshman there. He dropped out of Syracuse to join the Marines after September 11, and he volunteered to fight in the infantry. He was exactly where he wanted to be. I had another guy, Ramses Yebra, who was not in college, who had been offered 5 Division I cross-country scholarships. He turned them all down so that he could join the Marines in the wake of September 11. He also volunteered for the military. He was a first-generation Colombian-American immigrant who grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. So my guys were young, but they were motivated, and they were where they wanted to be. For about 3 months, we trained. We didn't know what we were going to be doing, because at the end of 2003, Marines left Iraq. We thought there wasn't any fighting left to be had, but we were wrong. By the time 2004 came around, it became very apparent that there was a lot of fighting left to be had, and that the Marines would go back, and that Joker 1, my platoon, and I would go back with them. So we went to this province called the Anbar province. And this was the heart of the insurgency that broke out across Iraq in 2004. And in fact, we deployed to the heart of the insurgency, because we were deployed to a city called Ramadi, which was the capital city of the Anbar province. It had about 450,000 people in it, and its population density was greater than that of New York City or Washington, D.C. For these 450,000 people, there were 160 Marines. And the job that the 160 of us had were to keep those people safe, secure, and to keep insurgents both out of the population, both from attacking us and from attacking them. When you have 160 folks and you're trying to secure 450,000, it's a fairly difficult mission. And as time wound on, and as the summer of 2004 wound on, we found ourselves fighting every single day. Once a week, we launched everyone we had into the city to fight thousands and thousands of attackers. We averaged 3 enemy contacts a day. For most of the summer of 2004, we were the most engaged unit in all of Iraq. One of our positions was the most attacked position in all of Iraq. We never rested. We were never pulled off the front lines. We never had a single day off. And so by the time we finished 8 months later, 1/3 of my platoon had been wounded. 1/2 of my company had been wounded. Our sister company, Echo Company, had lost 22 Marines. They were decimated twice over. And we were told that we had suffered the worst casualty rate of any battalion, Marine or Army, since Vietnam. So I came back from war in October 2004. 2 years later, I got involuntarily recalled. I went to spend another tour in Afghanistan with the Special Forces. So if you think about it, I've spent most of my 20s at war. I missed 3 wedding anniversaries and most of my oldest daughter's 2nd year of life. And so that decade hasn't been easy, but it's been good. And life isn't always easy, but life is always good. And I pulled a lot of lessons from that experience. that the Marines taught me. And as I've processed those through the lens of my faith, I've realized the Marines taught them to me. They are ultimately Christian lessons. And the Marines taught them to me because they're true and because they work. And what I like to do is share a couple of those with you that have really helped me persevere through life as I've come back from the war. The first thing that the Corps teaches, and this is the fundamental principle of Christian leadership. The first thing it teaches this: good leadership is based on good character. Character comes before competence. And that if you want to build your character, you have got to pursue virtue with the same intentionality with which you pursue anything else in life. So think about it this way. If you want to make an A on a test, typically you study. You go to class, you learn the material, you have a study plan, and you work on it. And then you show up and you hopefully do your best. If you want to run a marathon, you have to train. You train for hours, you train for days, you have a training plan, you follow the training plan. It's the same thing with your character. It's like anything else in life you want to be good at. You have to know what virtues you are building into your life. You have to have a plan to build them into your life. And that is the way that you become the person that you want to be. Because I can promise you this, and this is a great thing the Corps taught us. When you are under fire, or you have to make a hard decision, or you are looking around and you know life and death is on the line, and you've got a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old, and he's looking at you, his buddies are scattered all over the city, there are bombs, there are explosions, everything is going off. You got a 20-year-old and he's looking at you and he's saying, I don't know what to do. What now, Lieutenant? When you are sitting at work and you have to make a hard ethical decision, do I say yes or do I say no? Knowing that if I say no, it is going to seriously negatively impact my career, but it's the right thing to do. When you have to make those really hard decisions, when you are surrounded by a group of your peers and they're saying, hey, we want you to do this, this can be a whole host of any number of things, but you know it's wrong, and you know if you say no, that they're gonna ostracize you, at least for a little bit. When you are sitting there and you gotta make that decision in the moment, it is not the person that you hope you are that's gonna make the decision. It's not the person that you wish you would be. The character fairy isn't gonna come down and bless you with inordinate wisdom. You're not gonna hit the good character switch and all of a sudden you know what the right thing to do is. No. When someone's looking at you and they're saying, what now? It is a person you have trained yourself to be over the course of years that either makes that decision well or makes it poorly. You are exactly who you make yourself to be. You are exactly the person whose virtues are on display, who has built virtue into themselves, that has to make the right call at that moment. And so that is the first sort of fundamental principle that the Corps taught us and that Christ teaches and that God teaches. You have got to pursue virtue. And so the first question is, okay, great. What virtues? Well, one of the first virtues, the virtue that Christ so exemplified, was humility. This is Abraham Lincoln. You all recognize him. The person directly next to him is Edmund Stanton. Edmund Stanton, many of you may or may not know, but he was Lincoln's Secretary of War. He was actually probably Lincoln's most avid opponent for the Republican nomination for president. Lincoln was not the first choice for the Republicans. He was the second choice in many ways. This man, Edmund Stanton, was the first choice. And so when Lincoln captured the nomination for president, Stanton was disappointed. Lincoln, knowing that he needed the best and the brightest to lead America through what was arguably its greatest crisis ever, called upon his former rival to serve as his Secretary of War, one of the most important positions in a nation at civil war. This was actually not the first time, though, that Lincoln had encountered Stanton. He had met him 6 years prior to the Republican nominating convention as a fellow lawyer on a case in Ohio. And Lincoln had actually asked Stanton, would you go to lunch with me? Stanton refused him. And Stanton later told his friend, the reason that I didn't go to lunch with Lincoln was because I didn't want to be seen walking down the street with a long-armed ape. Well, if you fast forward 6 years, the long-armed ape is now his president, and he is the Secretary of War, but he has not stomached that transition perhaps as well as he could have. So Lincoln has this congressman walk into his office, and the congressman says, "Hey, sir, Mr. President, I just came from Secretary Stanton's office, and he has called you a fool." Lincoln said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, he called you a fool," and then he repeated it. Lincoln said, "Well," paused for a second, said, "Well, if Stanton says I am a fool, then a fool I must be, because Stanton is generally right, and he generally says what he means. I will step over and see him." Lincoln was known for his humility, his ability to take his own pride and put it aside, view himself and the world for what it really was, and take the best advice from the best people so that he could lead in the best way possible. Now, humility is a virtue that is often misunderstood. A lot of people think it's simply self-effacement or lack of confidence, but that's not true. I think one of the best definitions I've ever heard is that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. It is having the most accurate view of yourself possible and transmitting that view clearly to others. This is a picture of English General Oliver Cromwell. You may notice, if you can see, he has some warts on his face. In the 17th century, he led the English forces that overthrew the kingdom, essentially, and established a parliamentary democracy. He was the most powerful man of his generation, arguably the most powerful man of the last 100 years. And when he sat for a painting in 1654, the painter knew that he was painting the most powerful man of his generation. And so he painted him as an idealized Roman god. Cromwell took one look at that and demanded it be redone. And he said, "You will paint me just as I am, warts and all, or else I won't pay a farthing for this." And that's where we get the English language expression, "just as I am, warts and all." And I think that is probably the best example of humility that I know. Knowing yourself accurately and being unafraid to accurately transmit that view to others. Doing that is not easy. It requires that you seek out constructive criticism. It requires that you take advice. It requires that you deliberately engage people around you who can observe your life and speak truth into it. So as you go on break, I ask you to think about a couple of things. How often do you seek constructive criticism from your friends? Do you give thought to the friends that you pursue? Do you pursue friends who you know will give you advice that will make you better, even if it's advice that you don't want to hear or that is painful to hear? How often do you say, "Please forgive me"? The next virtue that we learned underpins leadership is a virtue of discipline. And in many ways, that has a negative connotation because a lot of us think it means punishment, but that's not true. In fact, the word itself originates from the Latin term disciplina, which means teaching or learning. And it first entered the English language, as a reference to the systematic instruction that was given to pupils to teach them to follow a particular code of conduct or order. Merriam-Webster's dictionary lists several definitions. One is orderly or prescribed conduct or pattern of behavior. In this case, when I say discipline, what I mean is the virtue that keeps a leader on the straight and narrow, that helps them adhere to both the moral standards and the organizational standards that you demand everyone else uphold. It's a virtue that allows you as a leader to say, "Hey, if you want to know what right looks like, you can just look at me and you will know what right looks like." This is a picture of a legendary polar explorer, Ernest Shackleton's ship. In 1914, he and 56 others sailed in this ship from British waters to attempt the last feat in the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. They wanted to cross the South Pole on foot. In 1950, this ship got frozen in the Antarctic Weddell Sea, and the crew had to abandon ship. They had to set up tents. They had to sleep in reindeer bags on the bare ice. Eventually, the ship got crushed by the ice. It sank. Most of their provisions sank. So they had to strictly ration their food, and they had to stand 4-hour watches, i.e. every man got to sleep for 4 hours, and then he had to stay awake for 4 hours because the ice was opening and closing. If it opened and if you were sitting on it, your entire camp could disappear in a moment. Their leader, Ernest Shackleton, did everything he asked his men to do. They ate the same meal 3 times a day with the same 3 utensils, a fork, their fingers, and a cup. He ate exactly what they ate. When it was his turn to serve all of his men food, that is exactly what he did, carrying a hot pot from tent to tent. When it was his turn to stand up, to wake up at night and watch the ice so that it did not open and kill his men, he did it. And when it was his turn to strap himself into the sled like a sled dog and pull his camp from place to place to avoid the treacherous ice flows, he did just that. He did exactly what he asked his men to do. And after nearly a year stranded in Antarctica, every single one of his men was rescued because every single one of them could look to their leader and they could know exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Day in and day out, they knew what right looked like. That is a great example of what I call executional or organizational discipline, where you are modeling non-moral standards. There is also an ethical discipline where you model moral standards. I think the best way to boil it down is I will not lie, cheat, or steal, and I will not tolerate those who do. Now, many of you are not going to have to make life or death ethical decisions or navigate complex moral dilemmas in the next several weeks, but I guarantee you every one of you are going to have a chance to make smaller moral choices every single day. And because a lot of times they seem smaller in magnitude, they seem lower in importance. For example, does it really matter if I tell my parents that I've finished my homework when I haven't really even started? If I'm working on a project with a team, does it really matter if I tell them my part is finished when it's actually half done? Does it really matter for me as a dad when I tell my daughters, I will be at your recital and then I don't show up? Or I tell my wife, I'll be home for dinner on time and then I'm not. Or I tell my boss, I'm gonna get that done for you by Friday and then I don't. The answer is, yeah, it really matters. Every little promise that you make is noticed. Every little time you decide that, you know what, I'm gonna kind of fudge the truth because it's just gonna be more difficult if I have to tell the whole truth, or I'm just gonna tell a small lie because I really don't want the conflict that telling the truth is gonna provoke, and I have to watch this in myself every day. Every time that you do that, guess what? You train yourself to be undisciplined with respects to ethics and morality. And so then when the big decisions are made, you are going to behave in exactly the same way that you trained. Probably a lot of you have heard of Bernie Madoff, arguably the greatest financial fraud in history. I promise you, he did not graduate high school and say, you know what? My goal in life is to be paraded in an orange jumpsuit in front of the media cameras because I'm going to court and everyone, when they hear my name, thinks one thing, they think cheat. Man, that's my goal. I hope I get there. If I work hard and just really try hard, I bet you I too could be a federal inmate. He did not do that. I guarantee it. What happened to Bernie Madoff was this. He made one small decision once, that he would hide a small loss in his investment accounts. And then he made that decision again. Because once he made it the first time, it became easier to make again. And he made that decision again and again and again and again over time. And so he trained himself to be undisciplined morally. And over the course of years, he turned himself into the largest fraud in America's history. And I promise you, he did not want that, and he did not set out with that, and he does not want his remembrance to be, I'm a cheat. But that's what happened, and it was because as a leader, he did not have moral discipline. The next virtue that we were taught was excellence. This is about the best story I can give you of excellence. This is a picture of Team Hoyt. Dick Hoyt is pushing. Rick Hoyt, his son, is in the wheelchair. When he was 37, Dick Hoyt entered a 5-mile charity race with Rick. Dick was flabby and out of shape. He had no idea how he would finish a 5-mile run, much less a 5-mile run pushing a wheelchair-bound son. But he did finish, came in second to last, and after he finished, he lay on the floor for an hour because he was in such pain, and he determined he would never run again. But while he was laying on the floor, his son Rick typed out a message with his head because that was the only part of his body he could move. And his message said this: "Dad, when I am running, I don't even feel like I am handicapped." Since that day, they have run over 300 endurance events. They have qualified for the Boston Marathon and run the Boston Marathon. They have run Ironman triathlons. They have swum amazing distances. They have inspired thousands. In fact, I know wounded friends who have lost part of a leg, who have said, hey, if these guys can do what they do, if Dick can do what he does, pushing his son in a wheelchair, then I guarantee you that I can get up every day and walk on my wounded leg, because what that guy does is amazing. Why is that? Why is it so amazing? The reason that it's so amazing is because he gives his best every time he runs a race, knowing full well that he is not going to win. And the reason that he gives his best, even knowing that the outcome is not going to be what he wants, is because he can do something that someone else can't. His son can't run, and so he runs for him. And the one thing I want to encourage you guys with is you all have things that others don't have. The first of those things is the gift of time. Guys, I have lost a lot of friends in war. 15% of my infantry officers course is dead. I had a friend, Roblaski, he walks out of the base one day and gives us a thumbs up. That afternoon, he comes back, he's been shot in the mouth. He dies in Germany. When I come home, I move his widow out of his house. He doesn't have any days left. My friend Shumney will never spend another day with his 3 kids because he died in a helicopter crash. My man Boulding will never spend another day with his wife because he died overseas in Iraq. A lot of my buddies don't have any tomorrows because they bled all of their tomorrows out in a nameless street, in a nameless city that no one back here will ever hear of. But I've got today, and I probably have tomorrow. I have a gift that many of my friends would love to have and will never get. You have a gift that many people would love to have and will never get. It's today. You also have the gift of being in the greatest country in the world. Many people in this world, 99% of them, would change places with you in a heartbeat. So given that you have the gift of time and given that you have the gift of a country, how do you make sure that you make the most of it? How do you live each day like it's your last? I don't know what necessarily it's like to live each day like it's your last, because even having been overseas in combat, I can't conceive of what it's like to die. But I think the way that we can make the most of what we've been given, the things that others would wish that they had and that they don't, you can do what Dick Hoyt does. You can give your best at the tasks that are in front of you, if for no other reason that you have a day in which to give them. You can study hard and you can take the opportunities that you are given to you as responsibilities, because to do anything less is a slap in the face to everyone like Rick Hoyt, who wishes they just had 4 working limbs or another day of life or a country to grow up in. You can understand that with every right there comes a commensurate duty, and you can do what I try to do, which is live in fear that at the end of days, I will stand before God and he will look at me and he will say, Donovan, with everything I've given you, you have served only yourself, and you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. When I was a Marine basic officer candidate school, which is basic training, every night we had to lay in our bunks, and you're in this big sort of metal rectangle. There's about 20 bunks, 10 on each side. And we lay in our bunks, and we had our M16s, our rifles, in bed with us. And this Marine gunnery sergeant would march up and down the rows in between our bunk bed. He would make us repeat after him. And I didn't quite get what he was saying until I went to combat, but I get it now. I understand why he made us repeat this every night before he went to bed. And this is what he made us repeat. He said, today I have given all that I have. That which I have kept, I have lost forever. And I get it now. When a day is gone, you don't ever get it back. And if I can't make the most of the day that I have been given by doing my best just because I have a day without regard to the output, if I can't make the most of the day that I've been given, I never get it back, and it should have been given to someone else. It should have been given to one of my dead friends who would have made the most of that day. So let me encourage you, you have so much, and your right response to the gift of time is to pursue and seek excellence. The next thing that both the Marines and Christ teach us is that before you can lead others, you need to know where you're going. You need to know what your mission is. Christ knew what his mission was. It was to serve others and give his life as a ransom for many. From the moment he was born to the moment he died on the cross, he knew exactly what he was doing on earth. Alfred Nobel learned this lesson the hard way. He had the distinct privilege of waking up one morning and reading his own obituary. Alfred Nobel he was a famous 19th century business magnate, and he built a business manufacturing empire because he invented dynamite. And his empire made dynamite. And one morning, one day, his brother was visiting a nitroglycerin plant, and the plant exploded, and his brother died. A French newspaper mistook his brother for Alfred. And so they wrote his obituary. So when Alfred woke up the next day and he read the obituaries, he got to read what others thought of him. And the headline was what you see up there. The headline of his obituary was this: "The merchant of death is dead." And he realized that if he had actually died, the world would have remembered him as the merchant of death. Because unbeknownst to him, that was the mission that he was pursuing. He was pursuing a mission of increasingly growing the sale of explosives. And he realized that that was not what he wanted to be known for. He did not want to be known solely as the merchant of death. And so most people believe that this was the event that caused him to rethink what he stood for, to really focus on defining what it was that his mission was, and led him to create the Nobel Peace or the Nobel Prizes, the Nobel Peace Prize, Nobel Prize in Economics. Today, when we think Nobel, we think the Nobel Prizes, and I can promise you that when you get into really, really difficult situations, for example, when you're in combat, it can bring out the darkest recesses in your heart. And so when I was overseas, and I was tempted to just say open fire because I was mad, the only thing that kept me sane was knowing what my mission was. And the first piece of my mission was I represented Christ. To my men, to the Iraqis, to everyone who watched us, I represented Christ. But I also knew that my men and I represented the Marine Corps, and that our job was to bring honor to our service. And that was very clear. There was no question about it. I also knew that my job was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And so knowing what my mission was helped keep me sane and helped keep me on the straight and narrow. And I encourage you, as you leave here today, think to yourself, what is your mission? Now I try so hard, and I fail more often than I would like, try so hard to say my mission in life is to reflect great credit on my faith, on my family, on the name of my Father, and on my Corps, because even though I'm not still in uniform, I can still serve. And I encourage you to ask yourself, what is your mission? When all is said and done, and you are being lowered into the ground, what is the one sentence that you want written on your tombstone? The final thing I've learned is this. As you guys think about how you lead, and as you guys think about how Christ led us, really the only leadership model that we as Christians should adhere to, and the only leadership model that works under great pressure and under crisis, is the servant leadership model. This is the leadership model that the Marine Corps teaches explicitly, because it realizes it's the only leadership model that works. And what that model states is this: a leader's job is to serve their mission first, their team second, and their own welfare a distant third. And this is hard to do, and that is why it is built on virtue. Because if you don't have the proper character, you cannot consistently sacrifice day in and day out for what you think is right and for those whom you lead. But I promise you guys, listen to me on this. People will know what your values are by the price you pay to uphold them. It's like anything else in life. You value something at exactly the price that you pay for it. So if you aren't willing to endure a little pain or hardship or rejection because you want to do what's right, if you aren't willing to put the needs of others in front of your own, then people will look at you and they will say, you are not willing to pay any price for your faith, for what you say you believe, or for others. And I don't think that that's really what you value. I'll look at where you spend your time, and I'll look at where you spend your energy, and I'll look at where you spend your money, and then I don't care what you tell me, I will tell you exactly what your values are. Guys, the job of us as leaders and as young people in this world, it is not to accrue glory or power or wealth or fame. Because I can promise you this: naked you come into this world, and naked you will leave it. I have seen a lot of funerals, and you don't take anything with you. Servant leadership demands that people observe what you do rather than what you say. It demands that your words, your beliefs, and your deeds form a unified whole, and it demands that you pursue character. If you want to do all this, the final thing you have to do is you have got to be brave. Because life is great, but it is hard. And there comes a point in time where you have to ask yourself, am I going to do the right thing? And am I going to accept that that is going to be painful? And am I afraid to do it, but I will do it anyway? Or am I just going to ignore all that and do what is easy? Unless we think this is hard to do at a young age, I want to tell you a story about the man on this screen. This is 23-year-old Corporal Jason Dunham. He participated in the Iraq invasion in 2003 as a leader of a 12-man squad. And when he came back, he was about to get out of the Marine Corps when he heard that his 12-man squad would go back to Iraq in 2004. And he told his mom he did not feel good about them going back without him there to lead and take care of them. He was nervous that even though he had earned every right to get out, he had done a very difficult combat tour faithfully, he had led his Marines well, he was nervous that if his 12 guys went to Iraq without him, something bad would happen. So he volunteered to extend his time so that he could go serve another combat tour so he could take care of his Marines. And he knew full well what he was getting into. I guarantee you he made that decision scared. When I went back for my third tour, it was hard. Because the first tour and the beginning of the second one, I did not know what war was like. I hadn't been in horrible combat. After that second tour, I knew exactly what it was like. And so when it came time to do that third tour, it was hard because I said, you know, I know what I'm getting into, and I know that if you go into combat enough times, the odds are against you. And he knew the same thing. So the first and maybe greatest bit of courage that he exhibited was what we call moral courage, where you're not necessarily risking your life, but you are risking your livelihood. And he said, you know what, I know what I'm getting into, but I'm going to go back anyway. And so go back he did. And on the 14th, 2004, he and his men were patrolling when they came under fire. They were heading south to cut off their ambushers, and they came across a 7-vehicle convoy. What I'm going to read you now is from his citation for the Medal of Honor. Corporal Dunham and his team stopped the vehicles to search them for weapons. And as they approached the vehicles, an insurgent leaped out and attacked Corporal Dunham. Corporal Dunham wrestled the insurgent to the ground, and in the ensuing struggle saw the insurgent release a grenade. Aware of the imminent danger and without hesitation, Corporal Dunham covered the grenade with his helmet and body, bearing the brunt of the explosion and shielding his Marines from the blast. In an ultimate and selfless act of bravery in which he was mortally wounded, he saved the lives of at least 2 fellow Marines. Now, unlike Jason, most of us are probably not going to be asked to give the last full measure of devotion to our causes and to our people, but we are guaranteed to face hard moral choices in life. Choices where it's going to be a lot easier to say yes than to say no, where it's going to be a lot easier to look the other way or to keep silent when being surrounded by yes men, or to lie when the truth is going to be too painful. So I ask you guys, as you encounter those situations, and too often I've encountered them and failed, so avoid my mistakes. When you encounter those situations, ask yourself, do I want to be brave, or do I just want to avoid pain? And the final thing I want to leave you with is this. A lot of people ask me, hey, look, Donovan, we don't know a ton of vets, you're a vet. How do we say thanks? How do we make sure that the troops overseas know that we appreciate them? Do we box up Kleenexes and give them to them? Do we send a bunch of books over? Do we come off the plane and do we greet them and shake their hands or go to the airport and greet them as they come off the plane? Do we shake their hands? What is it that we do? I've thought about that for a while, and I think, the best way to say thanks, and I'm going to pin to that, the best way to really think about how you not just say thanks to a soldier, but make a real positive impact in the world because you're a Christian and because you cannot turn your back on our culture and on the evils that we see and on the eternal salvation of others, because Christ demands that we engage and not turn our back. The best way that we can think about that, the best way that we can say thanks both to our soldiers and to Jesus for dying to save our sins. So think about this. Take the soldiers first. Those 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they fight for the person to the right and to the left, true, but they join because they love our country, and they stay fighting because they think that our country is a place worth fighting for, and they are willing to die because they believe our country is a country worth dying for. And if that's the case, then our job is to make sure, our way to say thank you is to make entirely certain that what they believe is true. That our country is in fact worth fighting for, that if necessary, it is in fact worth dying for. And the reason for that is because people like us are working day in and day out to make this place just a little bit better. The reason for that is because Christians know that what they believe is true, and they are unafraid to live their life in such a way as to reflect the truth and nobility of their belief system. They are unafraid to tell others about the man who saved them. And the reason that they live to serve others is because they have an example of a leader who served them. The way that you can say thanks, guys, when a soldier is getting off a plane, you can walk up to them and you can say, hey, I want you to know that while you were fighting overseas to keep me safe, I was working just as hard back home to make this country that you are coming back to just a little bit better than the country that you left. And oh, by the way, I'm doing that both because I appreciate your sacrifice and I want to make sure it's worth it, but because I also have someone who sacrificed for me. And he demands that I give my all in his service, and he demands that I engage with my culture and my community so that when the end of my days have hit and I am standing before the Lord, he will look at me and he will say, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been given much and you have returned much. You have made a difference in the world. You have pursued the things that were worth pursuing, and the world is just a little bit better for the fact that you were in it. That is our job as Christians. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.